The blizzard howled fiercely, a wild beast clawing with icy talons at the old, crooked cabins and burying the roads beneath an impenetrable white shroud. Winter, the mistress of these harsh lands, seemed to spare no one, especially not those who found themselves alone with her, face to face with her merciless elements. Elizabeth, a fragile figure wrapped in a thin woolen coat, desperately clung to the shafts of the sleigh, trying to prevent them from overturning in the snowy mess. The horses, frightened by the raging storm, neighed and reared, their eyes gleaming with mortal terror. And she herself was on the verge of despair. Just a few hours earlier, she had left the small town, hoping to reach the farm before dark. Now, lost and soaked to the skin, she realized that she would most likely freeze here, in this silent white desert, under the muffled roar of the crazed elements. Her hands were numb, her lips blue, taking on the hue of an ice crystal. The cold penetrated to her very bones, robbing her of her last strength and will to resist. She could barely feel her legs, and only one thought throbbed in her head: to survive. She felt her consciousness slowly slipping away, a weight like lead binding every muscle. The last thing she remembered was the horses, bolting from her control, disappearing into the white veil of the blizzard. When she finally came to, a wooden ceiling loomed above her, illuminated by the dim light of a kerosene lamp. The air was thick with the smells of smoke and damp wood filling her lungs. She lay on a roughly made bed, covered with a warm sheepskin. Beside her, near the hearth where the firewood crackled, sat a man. He was tall, sinewy, as if forged from steel. His face, etched with deep wrinkles, resembled a mask carved from stone. His dark, deep-set eyes seemed like bottomless wells, concealing a silent sadness. He was clad in a worn leather jacket, and a wide-brimmed hat was pulled low, obscuring part of his face. In his hand, the man held a mug, from which fragrant smoke curled upwards. He stared at her silently, his eyes, like two cold stones, betraying neither sympathy nor even simple curiosity. Only a keen, assessing gaze, belonging to a man accustomed to relying only on himself, swept over her face. "You're alive," he said in a dull, raspy voice, as if addressing a phantom. Elizabeth tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't obey. Her weakened muscles failed her, and she fell back, coughing. The cough erupted from her chest, squeezing her like steel hoops. "Where am I?" she whispered, struggling to catch her breath. "I," came the short, clipped reply. "You won't last long here if you don't warm up. Drink." He offered her the mug. Steam swirled from a hot brew of herbs inside, bitter but pleasantly warming. Elizabeth, feeling the cold recede, obediently took a sip. The concoction scalded her tongue, but warmth spread through her body. She drank it down to the last drop, trying to catch her breath. "Who are you?" she asked, when her breathing evened out a little and her vision stopped blurring from exhaustion. The stranger shrugged. His face, illuminated by the dim light, appeared sculpted from stone. "My name is Jacob, and yours?" "Elizabeth Harrison." He studied her carefully, then glanced back at the blizzard raging beyond the window. "What were you doing out alone in such a storm?" The question hung in the air, sounding more like an observation than a question, as if he already knew. I was going to the farm, to my sister's," Elizabeth replied quietly, feeling awkward about this unexpected encounter. Jacob nodded, his expression unreadable, as if her words held no weight for him. He rose, his movements smooth and silent, as though he were accustomed to navigating this stillness. Reaching the door, Jacob cracked it open, peering outside. A blizzard raged, its howl penetrating even the thick walls of the cabin. "The storm hasn't calmed. You'd best stay here," he said, his voice raspy from long silence. Elizabeth understood she had no choice. The elements were ferocious outside, and her sister was at least 10 kilometers away. She stayed. Jacob's cabin was plain and austere. There was nothing superfluous in the dwelling, only the bare necessities for survival in these harsh lands. The sole decoration of the dilapidated hut was an old, faded portrait of a woman hanging above the hearth. Here, far from prying eyes, he lived like an exile sheltered from the world. Elizabeth sensed something hidden, profound, in his gaze, as though he carefully concealed a secret from outsiders. Most of the time, he remained silent, occupied with his chores, splitting wood to stoke the stove, mending fishing tackle. He spoke little, offering only terse replies, but his actions spoke volumes. He cared for her, feeding her, giving her water, ensuring she was warm. For the first few days, she battled a fever, fighting off a cold. Jacob nursed her, applying cold compresses to her forehead and giving her healing decoctions. He asked no questions, showed no excessive sympathy, but his care was undeniably evident. As Elizabeth recovered, she began to feel the shift in the cabin's atmosphere. The ice within Jacob's heart seemed to slowly begin to melt. He met her gaze more and more often, and in his eyes, once bottomless and cold, something human now flickered. He started to tell her about his past, sparingly, in fragments, as if each memory was a struggle. Jacob had been a sheriff in a small town, lost somewhere in the wilderness. He had been married, raising a young daughter. But one day, a terrible tragedy struck, forever changing his life. His wife and daughter were brutally murdered by bandits during a brazen bank robbery. Fury consumed him, and he took his revenge, ruthlessly eliminating everyone connected to the crime. Afterward, he seemed to die to the world, leaving behind a past filled with pain and loss. I couldn't live among people anymore, he finished, his voice cracking, betraying his turmoil. Couldn't bear this pain. Elizabeth nodded silently, as if understanding his feelings without a word. She herself knew all too well what loss was. Her husband had died several years ago, leaving her a widow, entirely alone. Time passed, and a strange, quiet understanding blossomed between them. They cooked meals together, cleaned the house, and worked around the farm. She learned to understand him without a single spoken word, and he in turn came to know her soul. Elizabeth saw in him not just a reclusive hermit, but a man capable of the deepest emotions. He, in turn, saw in her not merely a frail woman, but a strong, resilient individual, capable of surviving in the harshest conditions. One evening, when the blizzard finally subsided, Jacob sat by the hearth, attempting to mend a saddle. The wind howled outside, but within the cabin, it was warm and cozy, with the fire crackling merrily. Elizabeth approached him silently and sat beside him, watching his focused work. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. Her voice trembled. He looked up, his gaze long and attentive, as if trying to decipher something. Reflections of the flames danced in the depths of his eyes. "I don't know," he replied quietly, putting his work aside. "Perhaps because you reminded me of what I've lost." She tentatively touched his hand. His skin, roughened by labor, felt warm. He didn't pull away, only slightly tightened his fingers in response. In that moment, something more than mere assistance bloomed between them. Something unutterable yet palpable, budding trust, fragile hope, and the recognition that they were not alone in this harsh world. A feeling which they both had futilely tried to conceal now seemed to break through every barrier. After just a few days, the ferocious blizzard finally subsided, and Elizabeth could at last continue her journey. Jacob helped her locate the horses, personally repairing the sled, carefully restoring each detail. When the time came to say farewell, he presented her with a small, carved wooden box. "What is this?" she asked, surprised, touching the smooth surface with her fingers. "Open it when you're ready," Jacob replied softly, his voice betraying his emotion. They stood facing each other, like frozen statues in silence, broken only by the howling wind in the treetops. Their gazes conveyed more than they could express in words. A whole range of feelings, from timid hope to the bitter realization of inevitable separation. Jacob knew that they might never see each other again, and this thought, like an icy blade, pierced his heart. He had resigned himself to his fate. Loneliness had become his constant companion, and he had long since grown accustomed to it. Elizabeth, on the other hand, felt a timid hope being born deep within her soul. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for sure: she was no longer alone. A man had appeared beside her, giving her a chance for survival, awakening long-dormant feelings within her. She settled into the sleigh, drawing the covers closer, and, turning, saw Jacob. His form, a clear silhouette against the silent white expanse, stood by the cabin. She nodded to him, and he returned the gesture. Elizabeth waved, and Jacob, smiling, waved back. The sleigh moved forward, carrying her away, while he remained, watching her go. The following morning, arriving at her sister's farm, Elizabeth took an old trinket box from her travel bag. Inside lay a small silver pendant depicting an Edelweiss flower, a rare and resilient plant found high in the mountains. Next to it rested a short note, written in his uneven handwriting. "So you remember." Only a few months passed. Elizabeth lived with her sister, slowly adjusting to a new, steady life. She often thought of Jacob, of his self-imposed solitude, and the hidden sadness she saw in his eyes. She knew he would never leave his secluded cabin, remaining a hermit until the end of his days. But she also realized their fleeting encounter had irrevocably altered their fates. She had given him a chance to feel something real, human, and granted herself a fragile hope for a brighter future. One day, sorting through a stack of old newspapers, she came across an article about a daring bank robbery that had occurred many years ago in a small town. The article mentioned the names of the bandits killed by a brave sheriff, and among them was the name of a man who, she later learned from another source, was the son of an influential local tycoon, willing to do anything to exact revenge. For several agonizing days, Elizabeth found no peace. She sensed that Jacob was in mortal danger. Revenge, as they say, is a dish best served cold, and she realized with horror that her silence might cost him his life. Gathering all her will into a fist, Elizabeth made a fateful decision. She had to return no matter what. She had to warn him before it was too late. And so, overcoming her fear, she returned to Jacob's cabin as winter began to set in. The sky was covered with gray clouds, heralding the beginning of a blizzard. Leaving her horse at the foot of the snow-covered mountain, she continued on foot, struggling through the deep snowdrifts. When she finally reached the dilapidated cabin, she noticed with a sinking heart that the door was wide open. Inside, darkness and a chilling cold reigned, sending shivers down her spine. She called out for him, but only a ringing silence answered, cut through by the howling wind. Chaos reigned within. Furniture was overturned, as if after a fierce struggle, and on the floor, among the disarray, sinister signs of a fight and dried bloodstains were visible. The woman's heart felt as though it had stopped. Beside herself with terror, she rushed outside, screaming his name, hoping her voice would cut through the howling wind that amplified her despair. Suddenly, in the deafening quiet, she heard a faint, barely audible groan. Driven by the sound, she ran forward and found Jacob, lifeless, sprawled at the base of the cliff. Around him, like ominous shadows, lay the bodies of several dead men. Jacob was badly wounded, his clothes torn, his body covered in deep, bleeding gashes. She gently brought him back to consciousness. Jacob slowly opened his eyes, and in them seemed to be an abyss of sorrow. His gaze was dim, devoid of its former brilliance. "I knew," she whispered, her voice trembling with the onset of tears. "I knew they would come. Why are you here?" he gasped, his voice rough and broken. "I had to help you," she replied, cradling his bloodied head, trying to ease his pain. He touched the corners of his mouth, and a faint but genuine smile appeared on his face. "You always helped me," he whispered, trying not to betray the pain. For several days she stayed, caring for him like a guardian angel. She cleaned and bandaged his wounds, bringing him back from the edge, pulling him from death's clutches. Jacob watched her silently, every movement, the worry in her eyes. His gaze reflected boundless gratitude mixed with tenderness. He understood that she, this fragile girl, had changed his life forever. As his strength gradually returned, they buried the bodies of their attackers together. His heart ached with sorrow, yet they knew they had to flee. They understood that they would be hunted, that peace was lost to them. "Where will we go?" she asked, her voice trembling with fear. "I don't know," he replied, gazing into her hopeful eyes. "The most important thing is that we stay together." Leaving the hut, they left everything behind. Their path led south towards the border, towards longed-for freedom. They didn't know what awaited them, but they firmly believed they would overcome any hardship as long as they were together. The road stretched before them, promising fresh challenges and newfound hopes. One day, far from the well-worn paths, they stumbled upon an abandoned cabin. Wooden walls, weathered by time, and a sagging roof seemed to hold countless secrets. They decided to stay. Armed with patience and diligence, the couple restored the dwelling, breathing new life into it. Thus began their new chapter, away from prying eyes, far from the shadows of the past. In this secluded haven, they learned to live for each other, cherishing every day spent together. Their love, quiet and profound, needed no grand pronouncements. It shone in their eyes, in tender touches, in silent support. They found in each other what they might have been seeking their entire lives: kindred spirits, capable of understanding without words, supporting each other in any situation. They had become one, two halves of a single heart, bound by invisible yet strong ties. One day, as the crackling campfire cast dancing shadows, Jacob slowly took a worn photograph from his pocket. It captured a moment of joy. Himself, his beloved wife, and their small daughter, all beaming with smiles. Each face radiated serenity. "I couldn't bear to part with this picture," Jacob said, his voice sounding hollow, as if from the depths of his soul. It served as a constant reminder of what I had lost. But now I realize that not everything is lost. Elizabeth gently squeezed his hand. Jacob looked at her, and a faint but warm spark ignited in the depths of his eyes. "You saved me," he whispered softly, his voice trembling barely audibly. "No," Elizabeth countered, her voice brimming with certainty. "You saved yourself." They embraced, lost in the silence of the winter evening. The air carried the frosty scent of pine and a premonition of peace. They felt better together than ever before. They were happy, simply and serenely. Years passed, one after another, accumulating into decades. Elizabeth and Jacob grew old together, their hair turning white, but keeping warmth in their hearts. They lived in their secluded cabin, far from the noise and bustle of the world. Here, surrounded by ancient trees and silence, they were happy, quiet and calm, like the rustling of leaves. One day, as Jacob, having passed the threshold of 80 years, drifted peacefully off to sleep, Elizabeth sat beside his serene face. She held his old, faded leather jacket close, inhaling the familiar scent of smoke intertwined with the aroma of wild herbs he'd gathered in the forest. Her eyes welled with tears, but these tears weren't from sorrow, but from a deep gratitude for every day they'd shared, for their long, quiet, and truly real love. She felt immense gratitude for fate having gifted her this encounter, for him entering her life and illuminating it with his presence. She was thankful they'd found each other in this vast world, for their love, as strong and timeless as the eternal ice. Now she stood over his grave, near the leaning cabin, under the shade of an ancient pine, whose branches seemed to weep over the loss. While covering the grave, she suddenly remembered the carved box he had given her many years ago, during one of those long winter evenings they spent together by the crackling fireplace. Her hands trembled as she opened the box. Inside, on soft velvet, lay the same silver pendant, an elegant depiction of an edelweiss flower, a symbol of their pure and profound love. Beside it lay a note, folded several times, written in his rough, but so very familiar handwriting. She unfolded it and read, "You are my Edelweiss." She ran her hand across the cool surface of the pendant, pressing it against her chest, feeling the warmth of memories spread throughout her body. She knew Jacob would remain forever in her heart, a bright and unforgettable memory. Winter had come again to these harsh lands, bringing with it a cold wind and long nights. The wind howled, fiercely piling up snowdrifts, causing the old shutters to creak. Elizabeth, wrapped in a warm sheepskin, sat by the crackling hearth. The reflections of the flames danced in the gloom, casting bizarre shadows on the walls. She gazed into the fire, sinking into memories. The life she had lived came to mind, every moment of which was now precious. She remembered Jacob especially often. There wasn't a trace of sadness in her eyes. Instead, a quiet joy shimmered deep within those clear blue eyes, like the reflection of the very fire that warmed her now. She knew she'd lived her life well. She knew she was loved, and this thought filled her heart with peace. She knew she was happy, despite all the hardships she had endured. Sometimes, when the storm reached its peak and the howling wind grew deafening, Elizabeth heard a familiar voice in the wild chorus, the voice of Jacob. And at that moment, when it seemed the whole world around her was collapsing, a soft, touching smile bloomed on her lips. She knew for certain He would always be near. This thought, like an anchor, rested deep within her soul, granting peace in the most unsettling moments. In her memory, dozens, hundreds of episodes resurfaced, confirming this simple truth. Memories, like bright reflections, danced before her eyes. Whether it was the first grade, when he gave her his only pencil, or her 20th birthday, when he, risking his life, obtained rare flowers for her. Always, in any situation, he was ready to help, to lend a hand, to offer support. His devotion seemed as unshakable as a rock that had weathered thousands of storms. This certainty warmed her heart, giving her hope and faith in the future.